Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Croft. I am in the final 6 months of the MDiv program here at Fuller. I'm very excited about that. I live with my wife, Kaylee, in Metro Detroit. We are part of a church, and we've been here for 7 years now. I was youth pastor, and I've transitioned into head of discipleship and all of our media communications. But over the next 6 to 12 months, my wife and I are going to be planting a new church community. It'll be a sprout from our current church, but it's going to function as its own. And it's really meant to engage a lot more of these topics that actually we read this week. So it was really exciting to see a lot of those things in the discussion, because that's what we want to incorporate more. And I'll get into my goals for the class at the end. So in reflecting on my experience in preaching and spiritual formation as a congregant, I feel like I've interacted with a lot of preaching. I went to a mega church and then a second mega church in my upbringing, and I really ate up a lot of what was preached. I consider myself an intellectual. I like to listen and learn, and I have good auditory learning, so hearing a sermon was always really beneficial to me. It always made sense. I could always bring it in. So I even at one point began listening to podcasts of sermons of other churches so I could just bring in more and more and more. But looking back, I recognize a lot of that was intellectual. It was brain, mind oriented. And a lot of my spiritual formation was more caught than taught. There was always like the application of a sermon, but there was very little spiritual formation in the sermon that was then taken into daily life and daily living. So I really began to engage in that spiritual formation, I would say outside of the church, in my Christian university where I did my undergrad. I was exposed to a lot of these spiritual teachers who were focused more on spiritual formation, like Dallas Willard, James Bryan Smith, Richard Foster, men that I've not read many of their works by any means, but they became formative and important in my understanding of spiritual formation. They began to tie practice into my spirituality. As a leader or as a pastor, I like to preach. I don't love to preach, and I think that's because I love spiritual formation more than I love lecture. Many sermons that I've heard have been useless, and I don't say that crassly. I say that actually with remorse and sadness. But hearing a sermon and it concludes and you stand up, and if the most important thing you can think of was that was a good sermon, it always seemed kind of like a waste, and it really seemed to miss the spiritual formation. So as I preached in our youth ministry, I really tried to tie in a lot of these practices. So my current understanding of preaching and spiritual formation, how they relate, I really think they are kind of like a dance. I loved Howard Thurman's discussion on where and how the sermon belongs in a church service, and how it's meant to be this smaller piece of a broader thing. And I think that's one of the ways that sermons can really engage people and develop people and interact with them, by using the auditory word to dive into a deeper part of the spirit and the soul. I've not seen this in practice a lot. I'm sure it happens a lot. I've not seen it a lot. And that's something that I hope to change. And that's one of the reasons why I'm in this class. I didn't want just preaching for funerals or preaching to preach. I wanted that preaching that ties into spiritual formation, because I think that's really the point. As a younger millennial who spent most of his life in church, I've heard more sermons than I could count, but I've not heard life-changing words that really affect my day-to-day life and affect my spiritual walk moment by moment, step by step. So my hopes and goals for this course are to see how these two things can be beautiful. I was in Dr. Clark's class for my intro, or PR500, and I kind of shared how I'm really coming back to appreciating and loving preaching because of a lot of the either wasted time or bad sermons or poor theology. And I'm really hoping that this class can bring my love for spiritual formation with the necessity and blessing that preaching truly is to the church, and show me a new way and an even better way where preaching can be one of the vehicles that people can carry or take into spiritual development and growth. So I'm very excited for this class, and I look forward to learning with you all.